Chapter 57. This venerable one listens to you play the guqin once again. Unexpectedly, although Chu Wanning's dumpling wrapping technique was clumsy, the finished product wasn't bad. The dumplings, made by his long fingers, were adorably round as they were lined neatly on the table. All three disciples were dumbstruck. Shizun actually knows how to make dumplings? Am I dreaming right now? Of course, the hushed mutterings didn't escape Chu Wanning's ears. He pressed his lips together, eyelashes fluttering imperceptibly, and even though he was as expressionless as always, the tips of his ears turned a bit pink. Xue Meng couldn't resist asking, "Shizun, is this your first time making dumplings?" Then how are you making them look so nice? It's not so different from making automatons. You just fold a few creases, there's nothing to it. Moran watched Chu Wanning from across the wooden table, gradually becoming lost in thought. The only time he had ever seen Chu Wanning cook in his last life had been after Xue Mei's passing. That day, Chu Wanning had gone to the kitchen and slowly made the wontons that were Xue Mei's specialty. Before they could make it into the pot, they had been struck to the ground by a Moran who had lost his senses. The snowy wontons had rolled across the floor. Moran had no recollection whatsoever as to whether those wontons had been round or flat, well made or deformed. The only thing he remembered was the look on Chu Wanning's face, the way he had stared at Moran without a word, with bits of flour still on his face, looking strangely unfamiliar and somewhat uncomprehending, even a bit dumb. Moran had thought that his shizun would be angry, but in the end, Chu Wanning said nothing. He only bent over and, with his head lowered, quietly picked up the dirty wontons one by one, gathered them up and tossed them in the trash. Just what had been going through Chu Wanning's mind at that time? Moran didn't know. He had never thought about it, never wanted to think about it, and truthfully hadn't dared to think about it. The dumplings were all wrapped, and the little snowman carried them away to the kitchen to be boiled. In accordance with tradition, Chu Wanning inserted a copper coin into one of them. Whoever got it would have good luck. It wasn't long before the snowman brought back the cooked dumplings, complete with spicy sour dipping sauce, in the wooden tray. "Shizun, please go ahead first," said Xue Meng. Chu Wanning did not decline. He picked up a dumpling with his chopsticks and put it in his bowl. However, he didn't eat it, and instead picked up 3 more to give to Xue Meng, Moran, and Xue Mei. "Happy New Year," he said mildly. The disciples were taken aback for a moment before they broke into smiles. "Happy New Year, Shizun." As it happened, on the very first dumpling, Moran bit into the copper coin with a crack. He was caught totally off guard and nearly broke a tooth. Xue Mei laughed at the grimace on his face. "Haran, you'll have good luck this year." Xue Meng said only, "Tch, lucky bastard." Moran said, teary-eyed, "Shizun, you're a little too good at picking dumplings. I got it in the very first one." Chu Wanning said, "Speak properly." "I bit my tongue." Chu Wanning had absolutely no reply to that. Moran rubbed his cheek and took a sip of the tea Xue Mei offered before the pain finally subsided a little, and he immediately began joking around. "Could it be that Shizun memorized which dumpling had the copper coin and deliberately gave it to me?" "You wish," Chu Wanning said coldly, then lowered his head and started eating. Moran wasn't sure if he was seeing things, but under the warm light of the candles, Chu Wanning's face seemed a little red. After the dumplings, a sumptuous dinner prepared by the head chef was brought out. Platefuls of meat and fish covered the entire table. Mengpo Hall grew even livelier. From the seats of honor, Chu Chengyong and Madame Wang directed the little snowman to deliver red packets to every group. A little snowman bumped incessantly against Chu Wanning's knee. The stones that were its eyes rolled around as it stared at him. Chu Wanning blinked. Even I get one?" He accepted the red packet and opened it to find several sheets of pricey gold leaf. A little lost for words, he looked up at Xue Meng, only to see the carefree man grinning back at him before he raised the cup of wine in his hand toward Chu Wanning in a toast. How silly. Then again, Xue Meng was really, truly. Chu Wanning stared at him for a while and, despite himself, a faint smile curved the corners of his lips. He raised his own cup toward the sect leader in return and downed it in one gulp. Chu Wanning divided the golden leaves amongst his disciples. 3 rounds of drinks later, accompanied by non-stop performances on the stage, the atmosphere at their table finally grew lively as well. This was mostly because the 3 brats had grown less afraid of him. As for Chu Wanning, he'd always been able to hold his alcohol. Shizun, let me read your palm. Xue Meng was the first to get tipsy. He grabbed Chu Wanning's hand and held it in front of his eyes to carefully examine. If not for the 3 cups of wine in his system, he never would have dared to be so bold. Your lifeline is long but disjointed, which means your health isn't too good. Xue Meng mumbled. You get sick easily. Moran laughed. That's pretty accurate. Chu Wanning shot him a glare. A long and slender ring finger? Shizun has good fortune with money. 3 lines from a common point. The lifeline branches off at its tip to merge down into the wisdom line, which typically indicates a willingness to sacrifice for love. Xue Meng stared at it blankly for a while before whipping his head up. Is that true? Face ashen, Chu Wanning hissed between gritted teeth. Xue Meng, are you tired of being alive? But Xue Meng, too drunk to detect mortal danger, grinned sincerely and kept right on looking. And the love line forms an island shape, he muttered. Right beneath the ring finger at that. Shizun, your taste in love is dreadful, absolutely abysmal. Chu Wanning had had enough. He ripped his hand away and brushed his sleeve down to leave. Moran was about to die of laughter, doubled over holding his stomach and cackling loudly when he suddenly caught Chu Wanning's icy, murderous gaze and forcibly swallowed his mirth. His ribs ached with the effort. What are you laughing about? Chu Wanning said furiously. What's so funny? He was about to storm off in a fit of pique when Xue Meng grabbed his sleeve. In the next instant, laughter disappeared from Moran's face as Xue Meng pulled Chu Wanning down in a drunken daze and burrowed into his arms. His forehead pressed into the folds of his shizun's robes, and his arms wrapped around Chu Wanning's waist as he nuzzled affectionately. Shizun, came the teenager's soft, velvety voice, complete with a tinge of acting cute. Don't go. Come, have another round. Chu Wanning looked like he was going to choke. Xue Meng, what do you think you're doing? Let go. Right at that moment, the little snowman from the stage suddenly clacked over. It turned out that the Tanlang elder's sword dance performance was over, and it was now Chu Wanning's turn to put on a show. Unfortunately, this also meant that all the eyes in the hall turned collectively toward Chu Wanning just in time to see a drunken Xue Meng clinging to the Yuheng elder's waist and burrowing into his arms like a spoiled child. The disciples were absolutely flabbergasted. One of them even held their chopsticks upside down, all eyes staring unblinkingly at their corner. Chu Wanning was trapped in utter silence. For a moment, the scene was incandescently awkward. The Yuheng elder could neither stand nor sit, locked stiffly in place by the way Xue Meng clung to him. A long while passed in silence before 2 dry, forced chuckles came from Moran's direction. Come on, Xue Meng, still acting so spoiled at your age? He reached out and tried to drag him off. Off you get, don't cling to shizun like that. Xue Meng wasn't acting like a brat on purpose. In fact, if he still remembered this when the alcohol wore off, he would probably slap himself silly. At present, he was drunk beyond all reason, and Moran had to pry and pull for quite a while before he finally managed to rip his cousin off of Chu Wanning. "Sit. What number is this?" Brows knitted. Xue Meng squinted at the single finger Moran held out. 3. Moran stared at him in incredulous silence. Xue Meng laughed and couldn't resist teasing him. "Who am I?" Xue Meng rolled his eyes impatiently. "You're Xue Meng, duh." "Then who am I?" Moran asked. Xue Meng glared at him for a while. "A dog?" Moran was stunned for a long moment before he roared. "Xue Meng, I'm gonna make you eat those words!" Suddenly, a Xixing Peak disciple from the adjacent table, who was either naturally courageous or whose inhibitions had also been taken by alcohol, pointed at Chu Wanning and gleefully asked in a high-pitched voice, "Hey, young master, look over there! Who's that?" Xue Meng, an authentic lightweight, could no longer even sit up. He slumped over the table, propped his cheek in one hand, and squinted at Chu Wanning long and hard. Chu Wanning stared back in silence. Xue Meng continued to squint. Chu Wanning continued to stare. And Xue Meng continued to squint. The deadlock lasted for a long while, but just when everyone thought that Xue Meng was about to pass out drunk, he suddenly grinned widely and tried to grab Chu Wanning's sleeve again. "Immortal guqin." The words were clear and unmistakable. Every last one of the disciples was left utterly unable to make a sound. There was no way to tell who started laughing first, but everyone soon lost control and joined in. Even if Chu Wanning's face was dour and his fuse was short, they figured that if everyone got in on the joke, then it wasn't like he could pull out Tianwen and whip every single person in the room. And so, the lively Mengpo Hall roared with laughter, everyone chiming in over meat and booze, adding to the chaos. "Immortal guqin. The Yuheng elder's so pretty that he really does look like an immortal." "He really does. To tell you the truth, I secretly wrote a line of poetry about him." "Yeah? How'd it go?" "The snow upon 1,000 untrod mortal peaks would pale against an inch of white upon the immortal's robes." "Wow, didn't you think of that?" "Not gonna lie, it was during one of these lectures on barriers." "That's some guts you have there, my brave fellow. You better make sure the Yuheng elder never finds out that you were staring at him and getting all poetic, inspired during his barrier lecture, or else the immortal's gonna commit murder, and your line's gonna have to become, 'The leaves upon 1,000 autumn trees would pale against the smear of red upon the immortal's robes.'" "So cruel." Just telling it like it is." Chu Wanning's face spun through a roulette of colors before he finally decided to fake composure and pretend to have heard nothing at all. He was used to being revered from a distance, but this sudden intimacy, born of the festive atmosphere and the abundance of wine, left him unsure of how to respond. Faced with such a situation, he genuinely didn't know how to react and could only force himself to fake a calm that he didn't feel. Yet, the bloom of pink on his ears betrayed the frozen expression on his handsome face. Moran noticed. He pressed his lips together and said nothing, but for some reason, an explosion of irritating jealousy surged through his chest. It wasn't that he couldn't acknowledge Chu Wanning's good looks. It was only that, like everyone else, he knew well that Chu Wanning's beauty was the sharp sort, like the edge of a blade, and that when he wasn't smiling, he was cold as snow and frost, too forbidding to approach. From his dim and narrow perspective, Chu Wanning was like a plate of savory and aromatic crispy meat that had been placed into a filthy broken box. Moran was the only person in the entire world who had opened the box and been able to taste the deliciousness inside. He's never had to worry about someone else finding out about this delicacy and drooling over it. Bathed in the warmth of the stove fire and tipsy from the warmed wine, so many pairs of eyes were turned towards this box that had once been of no interest to anyone. Moran suddenly felt nervous. He wanted to cover the box and chase away the people salivating over his food like he'd swat away annoying flies. Then he remembered that, in this life, the crispy meat didn't belong to him. His hands were full of clear, translucent wontons. He had no time to chase away the wolves drooling over another meal. To the surprise of Moran and his fellows, Chu Wanning had come prepared with a New Year's performance, just like the other elders. He would play the guqin. The disciples were starry-eyed, and someone whispered, "Who would have thought that the Yuheng elder knew how to play the guqin? He's so good at it too. I nearly forgot to try the meat." Moran sat there quietly, without a word. Xue Meng had fallen asleep a while ago, his breath deep, and even from where he was sprawled on the table. Moran took the jar of wine by his hand and filled his own cup, drinking from it as he listened while staring at the person on stage, lost in thought. The irritation in his chest grew worse. In his last life, Chu Wanning hadn't played anything at the New Year's Eve feast. Very few people knew how he looked when playing the guqin. There had been a guqin made of paulownia wood in the courtyard where Moran had kept Chu Wanning prisoner. One day, maybe to vent his frustrations, Chu Wanning had sat before it, closed his eyes, and played a song. The sound of the guqin had drifted through the air, attracting birds and butterflies alike. When Moran had returned, the sight that greeted him had been that of Chu Wanning's profile in the courtyard, indescribably lofty and serene. And just how had he treated him at that moment? Oh, right. Moran had pushed him down and fucked him next to the guqin, violated this man who was as clear and cold as the light of the moon, right there in the courtyard. Moran had cared only about chasing his own pleasure. He hadn't spared a single thought for Chu Wanning's pain and discomfort. He had even disregarded the fact that it was winter and his shizun, who couldn't handle the chill, had laid there on the ice-cold cobblestone with his robes torn off and been fucked until he couldn't take it anymore and passed out. Afterward, he had not fully recovered even after months of careful tending. At the time, Moran said in a chilly tone, "Chu Wanning, from now on, you're forbidden from playing the guqin in front of others. Do you have any idea? The way you look when you're playing is so—" He pressed his lips together, but he had been unable to find the right words, so he hadn't finished the sentence. It's so what? It was self-evidently a serene, dignified look, but for some reason it was so alluring that it had destroyed every bit of Moran's self-control. Chu Wanning had said nothing, his lips pale and eyes closed, the set of his eyebrows stern. Moran raised a hand and hesitated for a second before touching the tightly knitted space between Chu Wanning's brows. Chashianjun's gestures were almost gentle, but his voice was harsh and ruthless. "If you won't listen, this venerable one will chain you to the bed, and then you won't be able to do anything but sleep with him. Don't think this venerable one won't do it." And just how had Chu Wanning responded? Moran took another sip, watching the person on the stage, and continued his melancholic recollection. He couldn't be sure. Maybe Chu Wanning had said nothing. Or maybe he had opened his eyes and icily said, "Get the hell out." He couldn't remember anymore, not clearly. In that life, Moran had been entangled with Chu Wanning for so long that many things had become blurred at the edges. Eventually, like a beast, he had known only one thing, that Chu Wanning was his. Even if he didn't care for Chu Wanning, he was still his to sunder and to ruin. He'd have preferred to rip Chu Wanning apart with his own hands, bite through his ribcage and tear out his organs like a beast, than allow someone else to touch him. Moran wanted Chu Wanning's blood to course with his desire, his bones to bear his curse, and his body to be filled with his passion. Hadn't Chu Wanning always been so virtuous and untouchable? And in the end, hadn't he still had to spread his legs for the world's most wicked villain on the bed of the most ruthless tyrant, and had his life taken by the man's fiery weapon? Moran had defiled him, made him filthy inside and out, all over. Clothes, once shredded, weren't so easy to put back on. Moran closed his eyes, knuckles wide, heart hammering. Sunken deep into his memories, he could no longer hear the lively merriment of New Year's Eve festivities, nor the soothing sounds of Chu Wanning's guqin. All that remained in his mind was a callous, crazed voice, swooping back from the past and hovering like a vulture. Hell is too cold, Chu Wanning. I'll take you to the grave with me. That's right. You're a god. You're everyone's light. All of them. Xue Meng, Mei Hanshur, and all the common people are just waiting for you to shine on them. Chu Zongshe, how very saintly of you. The voice laughed sweetly, laughed and laughed, until it suddenly became cruel, like a soul split in half. But what about me? It thundered. Have you ever shone on me? Ever given me your warmth? All you've ever given me were these scars on my body. How very saintly of you, Chu Wanning. Your body is mine, and your life too. You want to be their fire, but I'll take you to the grave with me. I'll make you shine on my dead body and nothing else. I want you to rot with me. To live or to die, neither is your choice to make. Loud cheering and applause. Moran's eyes flew open. His back was drenched in a cold sweat. The performance had ended, and the disciples were clapping enthusiastically. Sitting in the crowd, Moran felt his vision pulse and blur, fading in and out. He watched Chu Wanning walk slowly down the wooden steps, holding a guqin made of paulownia wood. In that moment, for the very first time in his life, Moran suddenly felt that it was all so absurd, that his past self must have been mad. Chu Wanning wasn't actually a bad guy. Why was he even doing any of this? Moran swallowed, feeling the burn of the alcohol down his throat. But he felt at no less of a loss, exhausted and confused, until finally he fell into drunken oblivion.